Today, we uncover the early life of Marie Antoinette, a girl who crossed borders to become one of history's most controversial queens. Before the revolution, before the scandals, and before the downfall, there was a young Austrian princess thrown into a world she didn't understand. Her journey began not with a crown, but with a promise that would seal her fate and shape the course of history. Imagine being just 14 years old, ripped from your home, your family, your very identity, and sent to a foreign land. This was the reality for Maria Antonia Josepha Johanna, the Austrian archduchess we know as Marie Antoinette. In 1770, she was packaged and sent to France as a political pawn, her marriage to the Dauphin Louis Auguste, designed to forge a fragile peace between the rival powers of Austria and France. This alliance was the brainchild of her powerful mother, Empress Maria Theresa, who saw her daughter not as a child, but as a crucial piece in Europe's great political chessboard. The moment she crossed the border from Austria into France was stark and symbolic. On a small island in the Rhine River, she was stripped of everything Austrian, her clothes, her possessions, even her beloved pet dog. She was then redressed in French attire, a ceremonial rebirth meant to signify her transformation from an Austrian archduchess into the future Queen of France. But this ritual wasn't a warm welcome. It was a cold, clinical transaction. From that day forward, she was expected to forget her homeland and dedicate herself entirely to France. The weight of this new identity and the expectations that came with it settled on her young shoulders immediately. Arriving at the glittering, yet treacherous, court of Versailles was a shock to her system. Versailles was a world unto itself, a gilded cage governed by a labyrinth of unspoken rules, rigid etiquette, and relentless scrutiny. For a teenager raised in the comparatively relaxed Austrian court, it was suffocating. Every gesture, every word, every glance was analyzed and judged by thousands of courtiers, all vying for power and influence. She was an outsider, a foreigner, and her every move was watched with suspicion. She was nervous, isolated, and profoundly lonely. Marie Antoinette quickly discovered that being a princess was not a fairy tale. It was a performance, and she had been thrown onto the stage without a script. From her very first days in France, Marie Antoinette was met with a wall of distrust. The French court, and much of the public, viewed her not as their future queen, but as l'Autrichienne, the Austrian woman. This wasn't a term of endearment. It was a slur, a constant reminder of her foreign origins. In an era of intense nationalism and political paranoia, many believed she was a spy, a secret agent working for her mother and the Austrian Empire. Her marriage, intended to symbolize peace, was seen by its detractors as a dangerous compromise, a sign that France was bending to its old enemy. The political suspicion was bad enough, but her personal life soon became a matter of public scandal. Her marriage to the shy, awkward Louis Auguste remained unconsummated for 7 long years. In a monarchy where the primary duty of a queen was to produce a male heir, this was a catastrophic failure. The reasons were complex. Louis was likely suffering from a medical condition, and both were young and inexperienced. But the court and the public didn't care about the nuances. All they saw was an empty royal nursery. This private, intimate problem became public fodder for gossip and malicious rumors. Vicious pamphlets and cartoons began to circulate, mocking the royal couple's inability to conceive. They questioned her fertility, his manhood, and the very legitimacy of their union. The attacks were relentless and cruel, painting her as a failure and him as an impotent fool. Every bit of court gossip, every perceived misstep, was amplified and used to fuel the growing hostility against her. She was being judged not for her character or her actions, but for circumstances largely beyond her control. Her reputation was being poisoned before she even had a chance to build it. Life at Versailles became a suffocating nightmare. The pressure to produce an heir was immense and unrelenting. Courtiers would openly comment on her body, speculating on whether she was pregnant. Even her own mother, Empress Maria Theresa, hounded her with letters, demanding to know why she hadn't yet fulfilled her dynastic duty. This constant scrutiny over the most intimate aspect of her life was deeply humiliating. Adding to her misery was her husband's emotional distance. Louis was a kind but introverted man, more interested in his hobbies like hunting and locksmithing than in court life or his young wife. He was often withdrawn and indecisive, leaving Marie Antoinette feeling even more isolated. She longed for affection and companionship, but her husband seemed incapable of providing it. This emotional void deepened her frustration and loneliness. The whispers spreading through the palace halls were corrosive. Is she barren? Is she pursuing affairs to compensate for her husband's failings? Is she simply unfit to be queen? These rumors weren't just idle gossip. They were political attacks designed to erode her authority and influence. Long before she could truly step into her role as queen, the narrative had already been set. She was a disappointment, a foreign woman who was failing France. The foundation of her reign was being built on a bed of slander and suspicion. Then, in the mid-1780s, a scandal erupted that would irrevocably shatter her reputation: the infamous affair of the diamond necklace. The story is a convoluted tale of ambition, deceit, and greed, involving a cardinal desperate for royal favor and a clever con artist. This duo orchestrated a plot to acquire an absurdly extravagant diamond necklace, valued at a fortune, by tricking the cardinal into believing he was purchasing it on behalf of the queen. Here's the crucial fact: Marie Antoinette was completely innocent. She had no knowledge of the scheme. In fact, she had previously refused to buy the necklace, deeming it far too expensive. But when the scandal broke, the public didn't care about the truth. They were already primed to believe the worst about her. The story that spread like wildfire was that the queen had secretly tried to acquire the necklace and then framed the cardinal to avoid paying for it. Illegal pamphlets, the tabloids of their day, went into overdrive. They depicted her as a greedy, manipulative, and spendthrift queen who cared more about lavish jewels than her starving people. This single event crystallized all the public's resentment against her. The image of the extravagant queen who partied while the nation suffered was now cemented in the public consciousness. Despite her complete innocence, the diamond necklace affair became the nail in the coffin of her public image. From that moment on, she was no longer just disliked, she was hated. Under the crushing weight of public scorn and private unhappiness, it's no surprise that Marie Antoinette sought an escape. She began to retreat from the rigid formalities of the main court and created her own private world. She threw lavish parties, embraced flamboyant fashion with her famous towering hairstyles, and indulged in gambling and theater. At her private retreat, the Petit Trianon, she built a fantasy rustic village where she and her friends could play at being shepherdesses. To her, these were moments of desperately needed relief, a way to feel young, free, and in control of at least one small part of her life. They were a coping mechanism for a woman trapped in a loveless marriage and a hostile environment. But to the French public, struggling with poverty and hunger, these activities looked like something else entirely. They were seen as proof of her frivolousness, her detachment from reality, and her utter disregard for the kingdom's problems. Every expensive dress, every late-night party, every rumor of extravagance was exaggerated and twisted into a weapon against her. Critics painted her as a reckless spender who was bankrupting the nation, a charge that was wildly untrue. The country's financial crisis had been brewing for generations, a result of costly wars and an unjust tax system. But her lifestyle, however modest in comparison to past royal mistresses, made her an easy and visible target. Her attempts to find personal happiness were reframed as a political crime. Meanwhile, the real crisis in France was spiraling out of control. The nation's finances were in ruins. Years of war, coupled with the royal court's expenses and a tax system that exempted the wealthy clergy and nobility, had pushed the country to the brink of bankruptcy. While the privileged elites lived in luxury, the common people of the Third Estate were crushed by impossible tax burdens and widespread famine caused by poor harvests. The price of bread, the staple food for the poor, skyrocketed, leading to riots and desperation in the streets. The entire system was deeply unfair, outdated, and teetering on the edge of collapse. The anger and resentment that had been simmering for centuries were about to boil over. But instead of blaming the complex, structural problems, the centuries of royal mismanagement, the inequalities of the feudal system, or the nobles who refused to pay their fair share, the public found a much more convenient scapegoat. They found Marie Antoinette. This young woman, who had arrived in France as a teenager and lived her life in a gilded cage, became the living symbol of everything wrong with the monarchy. They projected all of their suffering, all of their anger, and all of their fears onto her. She wasn't just a person anymore. She was a caricature, the heartless queen who supposedly uttered the infamous line, "Let them eat cake," a phrase she almost certainly never said. She became the focal point for a nation's rage, a symbol of a rotten system about to be torn apart. Marie Antoinette's early years as queen were a story of conflict, misunderstanding, and immense pressure. But the storm that had been gathering around her was far from over. The worst was yet to come. Was she really the villain history painted her to be, or was she just a pawn in a much larger, deadlier game? As the political climate in France grew colder and more hostile, Marie Antoinette tried to find warmth wherever she could. She threw herself into a world of elaborate parties, decadent fashion, and theatrical performances at her private retreat, the Petit Trianon. This was her escape, her way of carving out a small piece of normalcy and joy amidst the crushing weight of court life. To her, these moments were a breath of fresh air, a way to feel human. But to the public, peering in from the outside, it looked like something else entirely. They saw a queen fiddling while the country starved. Every beautiful gown, every lavish party was just more fuel for the fire of their resentment. The more she tried to escape her gilded cage, the more the bars seemed to tighten around her. Her desperate search for happiness was twisted into a narrative of reckless extravagance. But behind the dazzling facade, another side of Marie Antoinette was emerging, one that the pamphlets and propaganda conveniently ignored. She began to pour her energy into charitable causes. She made significant personal donations to the poor, funded the education of underprivileged children, and even adopted several orphans, raising them alongside her own children at Versailles. She was trying to show her people that she cared, that she understood their struggles. She wasn't just a queen. She was a mother, a woman with a growing sense of empathy and responsibility. The problem? Her acts of kindness were whispers in a storm of slander. Her enemies controlled the printing presses and the public narrative. They painted her as a selfish, detached foreigner, incapable of understanding the French people. And so, her genuine compassion was buried under an avalanche of lies. The real Marie Antoinette, a complex mix of naivety and genuine kindness, was lost. In the midst of this political and personal turmoil, Marie Antoinette found an unexpected source of comfort, a confidant who saw her not as a queen, but as a woman. His name was Count Axel von Fersen, a handsome and charismatic Swedish diplomat. Their connection was immediate and intense. A deep friendship blossomed into a powerful and very forbidden romance. Their letters, filled with coded language and passionate declarations, reveal a profound bond. Whether their love was ever physically consummated is a question historians still debate, but the emotional intimacy is undeniable. Fersen became her anchor in a world that was spinning out of control. But this secret love affair also placed her in even greater danger. Torn between her heart's desire and her duty to a king and country that were turning against her, Marie Antoinette was walking a tightrope, and the winds of revolution were starting to blow. As the 1780s wore on, France's economy was in freefall. A combination of years of war, royal overspending predating Marie Antoinette, and a series of bad harvests left the country on the brink of collapse. The national debt was astronomical. The price of bread, the staple food for most of the population, skyrocketed. Hunger turned to desperation, and desperation turned to rage. And it was in this powder keg of social unrest that the most famous lie in French history was born. The phrase, "let them eat cake," was attributed to the queen, supposedly said after she was told the people had no bread. It was the perfect soundbite, short, cruel, and utterly dismissive. It encapsulated everything the people had been led to believe about her, that she was so out of touch, so monstrously indifferent to their suffering that she couldn't even comprehend their poverty. The truth? She never said it. Historians have found no credible evidence linking the phrase to her. In fact, similar phrases had been attributed to other royal figures for decades, but the truth didn't matter. The myth was more powerful. This single fabricated sentence sealed her fate in the public imagination, destroying what little was left of her reputation. Even the birth of a male heir, the Dauphin Louis-Joseph, which should have been a moment of triumph and security for the monarchy, did little to quell the rising tide of discontent. The tension finally snapped. The Bastille was stormed, marking the official start of the French Revolution. The anger of the people was no longer confined to pamphlets. It was at the gates of Versailles. In October 1789, a mob of thousands, led by market women furious over the price of bread, marched on the palace. They breached the gates, and the royal family was forced to relocate to the Tuileries Palace in Paris, effectively becoming prisoners of the revolution. Desperate, in June 1791, they made a daring attempt to flee France, hoping to rally support from other European monarchies. But they were caught in the small town of Varennes and dragged back to Paris in disgrace. This failed escape was the final nail in the coffin. To the revolutionaries, it was undeniable proof that the king and queen were traitors who could never be trusted. The monarchy was doomed. The end came swiftly. The monarchy was officially abolished, and France was declared a republic. Louis XVI was tried and executed in January 1793. 9 months later, it was Marie Antoinette's turn. Her trial was a sham, a piece of political theater designed to legitimize a predetermined outcome. The charges were a grotesque mix of truth, exaggeration, and outright fabrication. She was accused of orchestrating orgies, sending French treasury money to Austria, and plotting against the security of the French Republic. The most horrific accusation, however, was a deeply personal and baseless claim of incest with her own son. It was at this moment that she finally broke her composed silence, appealing not to the judges, but to the mothers in the room. Her passionate defense won her a brief moment of sympathy, but it couldn't change the verdict. She was, of course, found guilty of all charges. On October 16, 1793, Marie Antoinette, no longer a queen but simply the widow Capet, was taken to the guillotine. Her hair had turned white from the stress of her imprisonment. She was 37 years old. Her execution was a spectacle, the symbolic death of the old regime. For the people of France, she died a hated symbol of everything they had fought against. And yet, history has a way of revealing more complicated truths. As the revolutionary fervor died down, a more nuanced portrait of Marie Antoinette began to emerge. She was not the malevolent monster of propaganda, nor was she a blameless saint. She was a young woman, poorly prepared for her role, thrust into a political firestorm she couldn't comprehend. She made mistakes, yes. Her early extravagance was ill-judged. But she was also a victim of misinformation, of political maneuvering, and of a society on the verge of violent transformation. Her story fascinates us because it's a powerful reminder of how easily a person can be destroyed by a narrative they can't control. It forces us to ask, was she truly the villain of France, or was she simply a tragic figure caught in the wrong place at the very worst time? What do you think? The story of Marie Antoinette is filled with so many layers. If you want to dive deeper into other misunderstood figures from history, let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more journeys into the past.